Hello! Baldur's Gate 3! I had basically zero hype going into the game's release. I honestly wasn't even planning on getting the game for a while, but once I did start playing, I was incredibly blown away by both it and how popular it had become. It's received widespread critical acclaim from basically everyone and has been a massive commercial success, and I honestly couldn't be happier about that. D&D's my baby, and seeing it both get a game with this much polish and seeing that game be so popular and well received makes me very happy. However, when I realized that the systems the game included were basically just D&D 5e, I was curious to see how they were going to adapt some things. I've been a DM for going on 10 years now, so I'm decently familiar with how 5e works, and it has a lot of strengths and weaknesses that do not map cleanly onto a video game. With that in mind, I kept mental notes on how they adapted the systems of 5e to a video game, and came across a few discoveries that I thought were interesting, and I wanted to share them. So that's what this video is. A head-to-head bloody showdown over who gets to be the best way to play D&D? Hey dude, this doesn't need to be a competition. Like, both can just exist. It's fine. What do you mean it has to be a competition? It doesn't. It literally... No, it literally doesn't. You don't have to... They can both just exist. It's fine. No, I'm not going to be intimidated by you. You're not going to make me do this. I will not make a pointless competition here. You can't... Hey, get back here! So that's what this video is. A way for me to share some comparisons I find interesting. First, a couple of disclaimers. One, I played this entire game with a mod that let me have an increased party size, entirely because I wanted to be able to explore with everyone and meet everyone without needing to play through multiple 200-hour campaigns. As such, I won't be commenting on combat difficulty, as I don't feel like I got a representative sample of it. I tried to make a point of commenting only on things I knew wouldn't be affected by the increased party size. Two, this is not a review. I have some positive and negative things to say about the game, but these are elements purely in isolation. I think the game is excellent, but the game could be utterly terrible and it would have little effect on what I'm going to be talking about here. This isn't a review, this is a case study of adaptation. With that in mind, let's get started. Before we go too deep, we need to cover some basic stuff. For those not familiar with the tabletop game, the way the game releases content is by releasing new books with new things like classes, subclasses, and enemies, and so on. Baldur's Gate 3 mainly focuses on adapting the player's handbook, basically the core essential rules to play the game. It's the foundation that everything else is built on, so mainly adapting it makes sense. However, the dev did more than that. This is mostly apparent in the spell list, which is missing several spells from the handbook. Silent Image is a big one, Tensor's Floating Disc, Unseen Servant. However, something you'll notice is that a lot of these would be an absolute pain in the ass to include in a digital game. Silent Image lets you make an illusion of literally whatever you want that can move without making a sound. That is an insane nightmare to try and code in, so cutting the spells that are difficult to manage and focusing on ones that are doable is a good idea. However, there are quite a few difficult to introduce spells that are nonetheless in the game, like Speak with Animals. Speak with Animals lets you, speak with animals. It's kind of obvious. And amazingly, all the animals in the game are both able to have a conversation with you and they're fully voice acted. It's wild. That's so much attention to detail for such a small spell. It's frankly incredible that they managed to include it. And there are details like this all over the game. It's insane. For whatever I say going forward, I want to make it clear that this game is a triumph. However, they didn't just copy the player's handbook verbatim. They also reached out and grabbed material from outside the player's handbook. Circle of Spores is a good example of this, as it normally comes from a different book from the base rulebook, Tasha's Culture of Everything in this case, but it's been translated into Baldur's Gate 3 to give druids a third option that gives them a melee playstyle alternative to Wild Shape. These kind of inclusions are all over the place, and they're motivated enough that each one I've encountered feels like a good addition. Now that's the basic stuff. Let's look at more complicated benefits. Take a look at this area here. This isn't a super complex level of the game, it's just a basic castle, although with some new decorations and markings. However, there's actually a lot to do in this castle. There's obviously the major NPCs, the boss, the priest, the drow, but there's also a lot of minor NPCs. This priest, the torture victim, the scrying eye, the vault and the treasure back here, this scene with the guy, that's not even everything. There's a lot to do in this area. Now I want you to imagine you're the DM for a campaign. You've prepared an area like this for the players to explore, and you need to describe the area to them. You could just do a list like I did before, but that doesn't really immerse the players in the area, and it can feel very railroady, just a boring checklist of side things the player can go do. If you unveil things as the party explores, that gives them more options, but it also takes significantly longer and can really drag down the pace. You could go for some visual representations, but unless you're a very good artist or have a giant wallet, it's going to be hard to do that in a meaningful way without just needing to describe things anyway. Tabletop D&D is, by necessity, primarily a word-based medium, and because of that, you're always going to be at a disadvantage in creating visual spaces. If there's a bedroom with several pieces of furniture and a bookshelf that's secretly a door, you need to describe that bookshelf well enough the players to know it's there, and interestingly enough that your players will want to investigate, without making it suspicious that you're giving this seemingly ordinary bookshelf attention. It's a tough tightrope to walk. Baldur's Gate 3, on the other hand, is a visual medium. That means that the story and game can just use your eyes to tell you things are happening. It doesn't need to draw your attention to the innocuous switch or mysterious holes in the ground, it can just put them there, and you can become aware of them organically. That's a huge advantage, and it lets the game tell its story much cleaner and faster than a normal D&D campaign would. But that's not the only advantage Baldur's Gate 3 has over Tabletop. You want to see something funny?
Oh dear. Someone's left a trail. Too much to bear.
Now, my first reaction when this happened to me was to burst into laughter. Especially because it involved Gale dying, all of my characters dead on the floor, but the whole game stops to have this interaction. However, if I was playing Tabletop and one character deciding to press something TPK'd the entire party in 3 seconds, I would feel very differently. While it is logical that a well-set trap would be able to kill a bunch of intruders, it would feel terrible from a narrative and gameplay perspective. This is where we get to a hidden bonus Baldur's Gate 3 has, and that's the mystical, magical quick save key. In Tabletop, you can either not balance things around your party level, which can lead to situations where one dumb decision or a missed skill check can kill everyone, or you can, and the world can end up feeling more crafted around the players. However, because it has quick save, Baldur's Gate 3 encounters can be a lot more lethal, traps more hidden, and more vicious, because if your party dies, you can just restart, which helps the world feel more authentic and alive. However, quick saves do have a downside. The most obvious is the player can, quick save. It lets the player immediately undo any decision they find inconvenient. This lowers the amount the player needs to consider the possible ramifications of their actions. A system like that existing in Tabletop would get complicated very quickly, and for a lot of players it would end up making the game feel trivial, honestly. That being said, I don't think it's a bad feature to include. For a lot I just gushed about how Baldur's Gate 3 being a video game gives the ability to paint scenes very clearly, one thing it pays for that luxury is that it needs to interpret the player's wants through keyboard or controller inputs instead of just spoken word. In Baldur's Gate 3, there are a ton of instances where I want to look inside a barrel and accidentally destroy it, or misclick on an item, accidentally steal it, and have everyone turn on me in a second. That kind of stuff would be insane to do in Tabletop, but it can happen somewhat commonly here, so having a way to undo actions is a pretty good thing. In addition, if I may take my objectivity glasses off for a minute, I actually personally kind of like the lower risk of a recoverable failure. I'm the kind of person who both loves to explore all options and loves to perfect the line of action. Being able to quick load lets me test various options if I'm in a situation where I'm not exactly sure what the game means, or if I just want to try something funny. It lets me take things significantly less seriously. At the same time, I can understand how that could be off-putting to some people. For those people, however, I would recommend just unbinding the quick save and quick load buttons. You don't need to use them. Save only on long rest or when you need to leave and play everything out. There will still be temptation, but it should be easier to resist, and it should give you a pure experience if that's what you're looking for. Because of the freedom of unbinding and the ability to avoid using it, I think it's a good inclusion. Now, onto combat. If you've ever seen tabletop combat, you know that it can run long, like multiple hours for one combat encounter long if there are more than a few enemies or player characters. This gets even more exacerbated if the fight is complex. Simple fights tend to be over quicker because they require less tactical thinking, but the more complex the fight is, the more time players need to spend thinking about options, declaring their intent, rolling physical dice multiple times, then letting the DM tabulate the results. It can be very time-consuming. Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't have this problem. Because it's a video game, the game can handle all the back-end dice rolling and math basically instantaneously, letting combat flow much faster. The game is also going to generally be played by fewer players than normal D&D, which means that just a few players can coordinate the entire team's efforts, which helps strategizing go faster. Tabletop D&D is also grid-based, primarily to simplify things. When you're staring at a table of miniatures, you don't want to need to calculate the distances between things with a ruler constantly, so using squares just lets things flow much smoother, cutting down on complexity and time. However, because Baldur's Gate 3 is a video game, it can afford to have that level of detail, which lets players exploit interesting edge cases and tactics they wouldn't be able to get away with in a more rigid medium. The visual nature of the game also lets the devs get away with more interesting layouts. Verticality is, for example, much easier to accomplish. In Tabletop, every vertical layer either needs to be stacked on each other as one map, lowering the clarity and creating blind spots, or to be separate maps, which is hard to navigate. In Baldur's Gate 3, they have an entire visual space rendered out, which the camera can freely navigate, allowing the player to see verticality easily. Low cover also benefits from this. Most players who play Tabletop won't have a fully rendered map for every combat, which means that they need to look at a line and interpret if it's a wall, a door, or a railing. Even with rendered maps, I still have players ask me for visual clarification. It's just kind of a problem when you can only view things from top down. Baldur's Gate 3, again, completely solves this problem by being a 3D environment, allowing the player to get a much firmer grasp of the area. However, this is where we start running into problems. Simplicity also brings clarity, and in Tabletop, it's pretty easy to just immediately see what you can and can't hit. It's harder to calculate hit chance, and that's something that Baldur's Gate 3 does better, but in terms of just seeing where to stand to hit stuff, it's fairly simple. In Baldur's Gate 3, there are a ton of circumstances where I get screwed over by small edge cases or corner cases. Like here, where Astarion climbs a ladder and is then just completely blocked by this railing. If I had been playing with an actual DM, I could have asked if this would happen, but in this case, I'm just completely out of luck for Astarion to do anything this turn. However, my main criticism about this adaptation of D&D is the dialogue scenes. Let's take a look at this scene. There's a bear in a cell over here, and I want to free him, but I would ideally like to do so while also keeping murder to a minimum. I also don't know if this bear is the one I'm looking for, or if they've just kidnapped a random bear instead. What I would like to do in this instance is walk up with the character I have that can talk to animals, check to make sure that this is the one I'm looking for, and then find a way to sneak him out. That's not how this goes. The game forces me to interact with these kids first, and my only options are either to demand they stop at once, also throw rocks, or leave. The last two options force you into a situation where you need to fight the bear, and the first option forces you into a situation where you need to fight everyone else in the room. There isn't a non-lethal option, and worse, I literally can't check to see if this is the right bear. If you have speak with animals during the scene, the only dialogue you can get from him is,
"Stop them! Free me!" Good. Now they die.
Which is not helpful for determining this. This also basically forces you into violence, which isn't great. Now, there are extenuating circumstances here. The bear immediately attacking people is understandable given how it's been treated, and those are a fair set of responses to pick from. Unfortunately, this kind of situation isn't an isolated incident. It happens all over the game in a ton of ways. This is a weakness of a video game as opposed to Tabletop. In Tabletop, you can just say whatever you want to say and do whatever you want to do because you're just having a conversation with another human. But in a video game, because the game is being run by a computer and needs to be fully pre-programmed, the devs need to essentially do a cold reading of their players to try and predict what kinds of responses they want to make. That cannot possibly cover all options, which means that the players are going to end up in situations where they want to say or do something and the game just won't let them. This also extends to party members. Here, Gale has just opened this magic book, and is having difficulty reading the names inside because he's not practiced at religion. At the same time, my character and Shadowheart are literally standing right behind him, but we have no way to offer any assistance, and if Gale backs out of this dialogue, that check is lost forever. What this means is that the world basically treats you like you're the only person in your party, unless you try to actively predict what kind of checks you're going to encounter when interacting with something. That kind of dynamic is basically impossible in Tabletop. If your players aren't too shy and like each other, they will end up working together to solve checks and advance the story. It's really, really hard to do the same in Baldur's Gate 3, and it honestly kind of shocks me that there isn't a system to allow party members to help you with checks beyond things like guidance. Now, you can mitigate this by switching characters, but that can only happen outside of dialogue. Some dialogue scenes can facilitate this easier, but some don't, and there are some cases where you just permanently lose access to a check because you backed out. Even in the best of cases, it's a rather large hassle for something that's incredibly basic to do in tabletop, and it disincentivizes that kind of behavior, which pushes the game to be significantly more focused on the main character than on the party as a whole. This whole system also tends to rear its head in multiplayer. To be clear, I'm extremely happy that this mode is included, and I think it's great and more multiplayer games should be made. However, because of the system where only one person can talk to an NPC at a given time, and because cutscenes can go on while you're not paying attention, it's very easy to miss things, or everyone needs to go all at once and act like a very cohesive unit. Now, to be clear, this isn't a negative in and of itself. I've seen a ton of people have a lot of fun with multiplayer, and that's very good. But speaking as someone who likes to see and do everything in a game, knowing that if two people get into a scene at once, I literally can't see both of them is really frustrating. That happens less in tabletop, because a DM is managing everything. Scenes are always available to everyone, or are intentionally hidden for narrative effect. It doesn't feel so much like chaos is going on as it does in Baldur's Gate 3. I think I would mind it a lot less if I could assist in checks more. Like, I'm a bard playing with a barbarian. They get into a dialogue with someone, and about halfway through they need to make a persuasion check. I'm literally listening in on the conversation as this comes up, but my +5 to persuasion is entirely wasted because I wasn't the one to randomly trigger this dialogue. It feels like when dialogue happens, we cut from an actual multiplayer game to a single-player experience with onlookers, and that irks me so much, especially because something I really enjoy about tabletop is how collaborative it is. At the best of times, D&D is you and your friends working together to solve mysteries, as a team discovering secrets, and the dialogue system in Baldur's Gate 3 is built specifically to disable that kind of cooperation. It's really frustrating. I've been negative quite a lot here, and I want to reiterate that this is not a review. Baldur's Gate 3 is a really good game, and if you like long RPGs and can stomach the 124 gigabytes needed, you should give it a play. And frankly, the fact that the game manages to adapt everything so well and so accurately that they managed to find ways to make spells like Minor Illusion detect thoughts and speak with animals so present and accurate is honestly incredible. My negative talking points come from the fact that nothing is perfect. Tabletop games are a pain in the ass to adapt because they are so fundamentally tied to human beings making human decisions. There are so many wildcards and details that are easy in the theater of the mind, but incredibly hard to do when you need to program every possible eventuality. Baldur's Gate 3 tackles this challenge incredibly well, about as well as a game can reasonably be expected to do, but inevitably things are lost in translation. Mediums are wildly different, scale is wildly different, and adaptation as a whole is a process of choosing which of your darlings to end. Baldur's Gate 3 is a victim to the difficulties of translations, especially with the dialogue system, because dialogue on the whole is just insanely hard to script without feeling forced. However, it does get a lot right, and it is still a triumph on the whole, and the fact that the adaptation is as accurate and playable as it is honestly amazing. Thank you so much.